This video is out way later than I would have hoped, as I came down with multiple illnesses that put me on the shelf for almost a month. As disappointing as it's been every time this series has gotten derailed, making these videos still feels exciting and fresh to me, and I'm eager to get back into the swing of things. With that being said, a quick reminder that I haven't seen every single match to have taken place, and the ones I do choose to talk about are all based on my personal enjoyment and nothing else. A slight spoiler warning, as I will be talking about match finishes here too. After watching 174 matches spanning 22 promotions, here are a few of my favorites in the back half of July. There are few world title main events that on paper appear as Teflon as this one. With an abbreviated build to the main event of Death Before Dishonor, you can't really go wrong by asking Roderick Strong and Mark Briscoe to put together a main event worthy of their reputation, and to little surprise, they delivered exactly that. While the match does lean into the company's past, this match finds both wrestlers amidst fantastic runs in their own right. Roddy has been able to finally be himself in 2024, and Mark Briscoe has been awesome with whatever he's been given under the TK umbrella. The crisp opening exchanges are handled with such conviction, setting a tone for a match with little to no wasted movement. It's another case where the best approach is often the most direct, and these two get straight to the point with a bunch of heavy-handed offense complemented by the personalities of each wrestler shining through. Roddy can act as a great foil for any babyface through his physicality alone, but here he manages to really rub it in upon taking control, best shown when flaunting the blood on his hands after busting open Mark. When Briscoe does swing the momentum in his favor, Strong is still a looming threat, waiting to unleash some brutal counters telegraphed earlier in the match, be it with the ring post spot or one of his perfectly timed backbreakers. Luckily, the champion is one of the easiest wrestlers to rally behind. In addition to just being naturally likable, he can take a beating as well as he can deliver them. It also helps when you have one of the best blade jobs in the game, and your opponent understands the assignment. As Mark is bloodied and punished on the ground, you eagerly await to see how he'll get himself out of trouble. That is until Roddy oversteps his bounds by using the J-Driller. Say what you want about the repeated usage of the 1 count nowadays, though I think the moment and the visual here are great. It's also an effective segue to an electric finishing stretch. Something else worth noting is the room where the match takes place. I'm not sure if it's the acoustics of the esports arena or if it was just the audio mix, but for all those big near falls, the uproar of the crowd feels like it lands right on top of the wrestlers, which is always a welcome addition. After an insane escalation of bombs, Mark Briscoe is able to execute a froggy bow for the victory, further validating himself as a world champion. When you boil it down, this match just takes two brilliant wrestlers and has them do all the right things. I wish I could articulate that in a more interesting way, but once again, these things don't have to be complicated. In a way, it's a bittersweet match, as it shows what Ring of Honor and even what AEW could be with a little more consideration, but I can't complain about what we got here. I just wish more main events were like it. Despite the general perception around New Japan this year, the first half of this year's G1 Climax tournament had some wonderful bright spots. Specifically, the campaigns of Konosuke Takeshita and Yuya Uemura, with their match together being the standout of the tournament up to this point. Instead of discussing that match, I wanted to take a look at Yuya's follow-up with the Imperial unit Jeff Cobb. Truth be told, I never sold my Yuya stock like many. My understanding is that he lost his powers when he had his head shaved, and now we're back on track. Uemura's turned a lot of heads by bringing things back to basics, maximalizing a lot of simple ideas, complemented by endearing babyface performances. With the momentum of 3 straight wins under his belt, he's tasked with figuring out a monstrous obstacle in Jeff Cobb. There's some really efficient stuff in the early goings as Yuya sticks to what has worked up to this point, though his trusty arm drags and drop kicks have no effect on Cobb. These exchanges and Cobb's responses make him look like an absolute killer. Yuya's selling and ragdolling further reinforces this, putting him in a bad spot in a matter of minutes. With the ebb and flow of a G1 match, you'd expect Yuya to gain some ground eventually, but rather than one moment where the light bulb goes off, he gradually inches back into this thing with a series of small victories. Whether it's a low bridge to get Cobb outside the ring, or one of Yuya's many attempts at aerial offense finally landing, it's a matter of persistence from Heatstorm. As they become more frequent, those small victories begin to turn into belief. The path is not a straightforward one, as Cobb seems to find all the right cutoffs, bringing Yuya back down to earth emphatically, but he still doesn't falter. Rather than going 50-50 down the stretch, Yuya looks to counter some of Cobb's signature moves with roll-throughs to secure a quick pin, relying on instinct to escape with a victory. It feels much more organic than simply overcoming this test through sheer will, and it's very easy to buy into. Belief can be cruel, and Cobb brings Yuya back to reality with an F5000 and a tour of the islands to hand Uemura his first loss of the tournament. Some real good stuff here, and worth taking a look at if maybe you've only seen the Yuya Takeshita match. I think a loss in this fashion is just as important as the wins in context of Yuya's development, as now we've gotten a taste of the peaks and valleys with him in this tournament alone. If he can keep hold of the audience like this, with a little more seasoning, you have a top babyface on your hands here. I'm very much a Nanae guy, and given that the passion injection matches are usually a safe bet, I was excited to see this pop up on the watch list. On the July 30th Korakuen Hall show, Nanae has targeted the raw potential of the promotion's Gaijin, who has been making waves since her debut. Bozilla is coming off of a narrow defeat to Miku Aono in the United National Title Tournament, and now must test her mettle against the wily veteran who will pull no punches for any opposition. The story from the get-go is that things are at even footing despite the size disparity. Nanae's experience allows her to work around Bozilla in the ring before things take a much more violent turn as per the passion injection standard. Bozilla's progression on the mat is showcased before spilling Takahashi to the outside, where an extended brawl takes place. Bozilla is able to take control on the floor, and the yard sale of ringside seats papers over some of the cracks. I do feel this section is a bit long in the tooth, but I appreciate the more ridiculous improvisations like an umbrella being introduced. The ref kinda just lets this all happen, but I can't blame him for not getting in Bozilla's way as she's ragdolling Nanae and Ishikawa around the first 2 rows. Regardless, the real good stuff comes once they're back in the ring. Nanae has had enough, and the two start slugging it out for the remainder of the match. This predictably kicks ass, as Nanae obviously hits hard, and while Bozilla isn't the most accurate with her own strikes, it only takes one massive shot to flip the match on its head. The wild swinging also makes these exchanges feel incredibly scrappy and rough around the edges in a good way. Amidst all the blows, Nanae has to work for any suplex or submission attempt, and even takes the time to try to wear down the vertical base of her opponent. I do think these strategies could have been implemented sooner, though it's not a deal breaker for me. In one final flurry, Bozilla catches Nanae in a sleeper hold, and rather than forcing a giant swing, she opts to go to ground to secure the victory. If nothing more than a litmus test for Bozilla up to this point, I had a good time with this, and I'd say she passed with flying colors. Nanae is an ideal opponent for this spot, and while the match certainly has its flaws, these two slugging it out will almost always make for an easy watch. Bozilla remains one to watch in the early days of this promotion. One of the many protected matchups of AEW mainstays was brought to fruition at the very end of the month as Darby Allin was pitted against Hangman Page and his recent mean streak. Twist in Hangman's alignment works for the Darby death formula, and I think for a first time encounter it's all the better for it. They're able to get straight to that point with Darby opening with a coffin drop only to be dumped onto the floor in response. This opening is able to get to the stage dive pretty seamlessly, which I also appreciate. Picture in Picture gets things back between the ropes where Hangman's control begins. He goes after Darby's back, and while not uncommon, it is a tried and true approach. I've seen some criticism towards this iteration of Hangman to where he can meander a bit while leaning into his character work. It didn't bother me in this case, though I think a great deal of that could be forgiven due to the impending feeling that Darby is going to crash and burn around every corner. This is indeed the case, especially on the outside with all the 6 spots involving the ring steps. Darby is far from one note in this match though. There's many clever instances in how he's able to navigate through the match. Most of these involve timing and making split decisions, like attacking the ropes as soon as Hangman kicks out of a roll-up, or knowing when to hit the mat to avoid a signature offense. Additionally, he's able to take advantage of those same ring steps in his own way, making the most out of a bleak scenario. As for the finish, I'm fine with it. Hangman once again reaches too far to prove a point in his quest for revenge, and you can see a pattern developing. The suddenness of a roll-up loss is only going to piss him off further, and it's clear that he truly can't move forward until he can exact vengeance on Swerve. I think this functioned very well as a TV main event, and it's yet another worthy entry into the catalogs of these two in 2024. I have quite a few honorable mentions this time around, as it was a very busy part of the calendar, starting with Not Hug vs Big Hug vs Natural Vibes vs Z-Brats from Dragon Gate, July 21st. A whole lot of fun, though maybe lacking a bit given that the major players from the cage match all crossed paths again. Konosuke Takeshita vs Masato Tanaka from DDT, July 21st. A big dumb bomb fest, and I mean that in the most endearing way. Diamante vs Layla Hirsch from Ring of Honor, July 26th. There's a whole lot to like on the Death Before Dishonor card, though this one took me by surprise. A case of two wrestlers going out there and making the absolute most of their time. This blew me away, and I appreciate the lengths these two went to get their point across. Get well soon, Layla. Manders vs Mad Dog Connolly from St. Louis Anarchy, July 26th. The first match of theirs I've seen happens to be the third in 2024 alone, so I may have not had the entire context. Nonetheless, it's a great psycho brawl that you can find right here for free on YouTube, and it's well worth your time. Hechicero vs Zelhua from Lucha Memes, July 28th. This may have actually aired in August, so forgive any inconsistency on my part, but this is just an incredibly well done map-based match. If you enjoy the year Hechicero has put together up to this point, there's a good chance you'll love this. And last but not least, Best Friends vs Mio Momono and Riko Kawahata from Sariism, July 29th. A match that does a nice job of balancing the sentiment of Nakajima's retirement road with all of the violence you'd want from the usual suspects. Sariism wins again. And that is it from me. If you got this far into the video, thank you so much for your time and for hearing what I had to say, especially with how behind the series has fallen. It is what it is at this point, but I still fully intend on seeing it through, so if you've been following it in any capacity, thank you for your patience. I will update you guys on what lies beyond the 2024 series within the next few weeks. In the meantime, you can keep up with me as I get through the watch list over on Twitter at OuterStevan, and I'll talk to you again next time as we get into August.